Let's talk about what to do if you're really bored or struggling to navigate the mundane aspects of your life. If you wake up and every morning is kind of the same dreary experience where you're just kind of plodding along, you're not really inspired to doing the same things. And I want to talk about some secrets or some keys to actually interrupt that cycle such that you can start to create some meaning, some spontaneity, and we're going to go right to the source of how to do this. So first, let me start with a story. One of my things that my friends like to give me a hard time about is my repulsion, and they would probably say my inability to tolerate boredom. I've always been this way since I was a young child. I always had to be doing something and engaged, and my parents told me that once I was able to walk and have a degree of independence, I became a lot less angry. As an infant. So needless to say, boredom has been something that I have navigated, I would say historically struggled with for a very long time. Recently, I get pretty bored quickly with things that are boring, things that are maybe more slow, like certain movies. The other day, we had the blessing to be in Portugal a couple of weeks ago. We were on a Europe trip leading a meditation program. We decided to go to Portugal for a few days, and we all work remotely, so it was a wonderful experience. We were going on this walk outside of this art museum in this treetops, like a beautiful boardwalk, trees. It was really nice. And I noticed myself say to myself, this is so boring, right? I actually love art museums, but for some reason, walking outside among the treetops was a boring experience for me. And I realized in that moment that the only difference between boredom and peace is judgment. Meaning, as soon as I recognized that, like, I had this thought, really, this is boring. I was like, well, what's that about? Why am I qualifying this experience as boring? It's because I was judging the experience, that it wasn't something else. So we could also say the difference between boredom and peace is acceptance. Because as soon as we accept the experience, not ourselves in this case, but the experience as it is, and I appreciated it, meaning I was looking around these beautiful treetops, the wind was blowing, it had just finished raining, there was a light dew on the ground or some rain on the ground, I was with these friends, it was like a really nice moment. As soon as I stopped judging, and I started accepting the experience and appreciating the experience for how it was, the boredom instantly evaporated. Actually, I never created the boredom, right? So all this to say, what do we do if we're bored or mundane in our lives? You could try the strategy that I just shared with you from one experience. I don't think it would work as effectively in terms of a life experience that you're creating, because accepting everything as it is, I think you'll find moments of peace, but it's not really going to do it. Here are the two things that you want to do if you're bored or suffering with the mundane aspect of your life. The first thing is to be in non-action. In the Bhagavad Gita, this wonderful spiritual text, my personal favorite spiritual text, there's a quote that says, "The enlightened one sees the non-action in the action, and the action in the non-action." So this points towards the power of stillness and doing nothing and the power of action. I'm going to first start with non-action. So the first thing that you want to do is nothing, meaning look at what is happening inside of you. Spend time doing nothing, because in that stillness and in that silence, if you practice this with diligence and with a certain kind of structure, over time, you will experience a certain power starts to arise within inside of you. It will start as peace. It will start as a certain gap between thoughts as you start to identify as the observer of your mind. You'll start to welcome more and more feelings, and you'll start to just feel more heartful. Now, if what will happen is that things will come to surface that you've been avoiding. Quick story, a friend of mine a number of years ago, he wanted to meditate. I was like, cool, we can meditate. Let's do it. So we sat in silence for about 6 minutes. I noticed his knees start to do this pitter-patter thing. And I was like, oh, he's starting to feel something, And he was like, actually, I'm good. He kind of stood up and walked away. And I was like, cool. And I kind of kept sitting because I was enjoying it. Now, here's the thing about this man. I mean, he's a wonderful man, and we don't talk anymore. But what's going to happen is that someday he's going to have to face that. And he actually said that he just felt too anxious and he couldn't sit anymore. Totally fine. one day he's going to have to face that anxiety, or he'll just die with it, which is, again, no big deal. It's just, I think, uncomfortable for him. So when we say to do nothing if we're bored, I know it's a bit of an irony or a paradox there. You're like, I'm already bored, right? Why would I sit with boredom? Because the boredom is likely an expression of something else inside of us. It could be kind of a depression or a sadness or a loneliness or an anxiety. The boredom is an expression likely of something else. So when we sit and do nothing, we give a chance for that aspect of our personality to come to surface, for us to welcome it into our hearts, be with it, you could say, and allow it to move into something else. You can't be bored if you're peaceful, right? So, and I'm an example of that, because when I'm bored, I'm not peaceful. And the distinction between peace and boredom is so thin. Again, through accepting the experience, and through taking a breath and through being with and piercing the boredom, you can find a new aspect of something else inside of you. So the first thing is to do nothing. Secondly, take an action. Now let's go deeper into this. The action needs to be inspired by a deeper longing. The action can't be inspired by boredom, or you'll live your life like how I lived about 15 years of my life. I was constantly inspired into action, and I did lots of healthy things like exercise and going out in the world and being with people. But most of it, I would say 80% of it, was driven by not being bored, not feeling depressed, and not feeling anxious. So all of my actions were an avoidance of rather than an expression of something, right? I was avoiding feeling something. And whenever we take a lot of actions that are inspired by avoiding something uncomfortable, we inadvertently often strengthen our relationship and our experience of that thing we're avoiding. I'll use myself as an example. I ran from literally boredom, anxiety, and depression for many years. What happened? Well, I would have these like physical experiences where dopamine would get released in my brain, and I'd go for runs and rock climbing, and I'd hang out with people, which was great. But at the end of the day, I still felt it. And I started to create this relationship where I actually, in some ways, made it stronger, made the relationship stronger with it, because I was putting so much energy into avoiding feeling it and avoiding experiencing it. And I was defensive and insecure. So a lot was going on around how I was structuring my personality to avoid feeling discomfort. Now, again, there's nothing good or bad about that. Just for me, it was an ineffective strategy around actually what I was actually after was feeling fulfilled, feeling deep connection with the world and with people, feeling intimacy with people and partners, and having like passionate, deep romantic relationships at that time, right? It wasn't a good strategy for that. So what we want to do when we take an action is to have that action inspired by a deeper longing to what? Experience life, to feel our hearts, to feel peace. Look at what feelings or longings can be inspired into action. Right? For me, it was this deep longing of experience, of feeling connection. And once I got tapped into that and I started taking actions based on that, one, the actions were really different. I stopped being kind of feverishly obsessed with the outdoors world and putting myself onto rock faces and all these other things and going from relationship to relationship. And I started taking actions that were seeking a solution to the longing that I actually experienced. And then I started to find amazing solutions that had me stop being addicted to so many different things. Eventually end up as a celibate monk and find a path, a transformational path that is on a day-to-day basis deeply fulfilling, because I'm growing and evolving every day and I can experience it, right? So non-action and action is the cure to boredom. Good luck, and you got this.